guys, welcome into a Training Tip Tuesday. James Wyatt with BC Fitness. The month of October and November is all about sports performance. Last week we talked about functional strength, and so today we're going to continue with that theme, and we're going to talk about mobility / flexibility. Now, what do I say when I say mobility and flexibility? Aren't those two things? You're like, James, those things sound exactly the same. And there really are some differences between the two. And so here's what I'd like to tell you. So mobility is really about movement, right? So it's how well can we move specifically to our joints, right? To our overall functionality within movements, right? So our shoulder joint, our hip joint, two of the most dynamic joints we have in our body. They don't just go up and down, they go circular, they go around. And so how well do those movements, how well do those joints, how well do they move, right? Flexibility is more about like elongation, right? It's more about being able to stretch, right? And pull, and you know, how far down can we go to touch our toes? That is more about flexibility. And one is just as important as the other, and they're both really tied together. And so here's some movements. I want to show you guys how to get a little more mobility and flexibility in your training, because all that's going to do is help you to perform better, recover quicker, and then also prevent injury. So one of the very first things I'd like to talk about, I mentioned it earlier, is your shoulder strength and mobility, right? Mobility, I apologize. So your shoulder mobility, how well does your shoulder move? And so your shoulder is responsible, right, for pushing up, pushing out, pushing down, and so it really is a very dynamic joint. Your shoulder is connected to your chest, also to your back, right? It's a very supported muscle group, and it's really easy. You hear people all the time tell me, I help people tell me, especially in the obstacle course training, is, oh, I can't do this movement because I tore a rotator cuff, right? Or because I have a problem in my shoulder here. And so if we can increase that range of motion, right, we can loosen up those tendons and get more strength in those tendons and in those muscles, then we're definitely going to be able to limit shoulder injury. One of the things I love to cite as an example are gymnasts, right? Now, yes, gymnasts do have a lot of injuries, but they also do a lot of great and amazingly powerful moves. And they can only do that because of their mobility and their flexibility, right? You see them do those amazing movements on the rings and on the high bars and things of that nature, and they can only do that because of years of training to mobilize those shoulder joints, strengthen those tendons and those muscles at the same time. So here's the key. Tendons, if they get hurt, if they get injured, they take an extended period of time to heal. Whereas muscles, if you know, for the most part, when you do strength training, you're breaking your muscles down, so they heal pretty quickly. So one of the movements that I really like to do is to really help on working on shoulder movements is to grab a band. You can use a belt, you can use a bar, you can use a towel, whatever you may have. A band, I just like a band because it has that stretch in it, right? So one of the very first movements I like to suggest my athletes do is basically simply this. You're going to grab that band, you're going to pull down, right? Pulling that elbow up to the middle of your body. And what that's going to do is help to stretch out all of this this tricep area here. It's also going to stretch out a lot of your back movement here, right? So you're going to pull down. So that's that connective tissue into that shoulder joint, and then you're going to pull up, okay? Now what this is going to do is on this left arm over here, you're going to start stretching out the front of this deltoid. You're going to be stretching out some of that connective tissue in there to that chest muscle, right? So switch sides, do the other side, right? So you're going to do a couple movements, right? So pull up, pull down, pull up, and pull down, okay? Another variation is going to take this bone, make sure you lock out those elbows, and we're going to rotate that shoulder around our body, right? So this may be a little bit more challenging. You may be able to, the tendency is you're going to want to bend your elbow, but we want to try to do our best to keep those elbows locked out, right? So this is a great thing to do maybe before you're going to do a hard chest workout or a hard shoulder workout to really help warm that shoulder up, warm those joints up, and get blood circulating to those muscle groups, right? And then the very last one is dislocates. Okay, now I know that sounds bad. All right, we're not actually going to dislocate anything, but the movement basically is those elbows are locked again, and we're going to pull that arm up and go behind our body, right? Forward and back, forward and back. And do it a few times, 2 to 3 times, and as you do it each time, you should be able to maybe get a little bit closer and a little bit closer without having to bend your elbows, okay? And that's really going to be the key. Then you're going to feel those chests and those shoulders really loosening up, okay? One of the other things that I think that's going to be super important is increasing that hip mobility, okay? Hip mobility is key if you're going to be a runner, if you're going to do any type of dynamic movements, right? So one thing we talked about last week was we were talking about our squats. was a really foundational, functional strength movement. And so one of the things we talked about was that a lot of times when people go to do squats, they tend to hip hinge, right? And so you tend to not be able to go any lower than this, and their torso is really forward a lot. Or when they go down, their heels come off the ground, okay? Now, I wouldn't say necessarily those are bad things or the wrong way to squat, but what that usually means is that you have limited either ankle mobility or hip mobility, okay? So one of the first things I would suggest you do is really try to work on the hip mobility. So really simple and easy movement we can do is we want to get on the ground, okay? We want to have our ankle even with our knee even with our hips, hip, knee, right? And start with our weight backwards, and we're going to rotate our knees from side to side. And the goal is to try to get both knees on the ground and try not to slide your feet, right? Because then you're kind of defeating the purpose of increasing that mobility. So we go side to side, side to side. Now, the keys in this are maybe at first, this is all you got. This may be all you have, okay? So you may not be able to get it all the way down. You're probably gonna feel a pull back here on your glute, probably even on your IT here. That's okay. As you do this, and this is so low intensity, it's not super dynamic. You could do this every day of the week. Maybe even add this as part of your warm-up before you go run or before you do leg day or anything of that nature, right? And eventually you can get to the point where you don't have to have your hands backwards, right? And you'll have enough hip mobility where you can move those legs, those knees back and forth. In addition to that, I mentioned your ankle mobility. Now, great little movement you can do simply is put your foot flat on the ground, grab that heel, right? Grab the front of your foot, because the key is going to be to keep your foot flat, right? And so what we're going to do simply is we're going to push forward without letting our heel come off the ground, and then back. So this is more of an active movement, forward and back, forward and back. Right? A great addendum you can do to that basically is come to a wall, okay? Come to a wall, and you're gonna try to put your foot, and this is how you can really see how you are increasing your mobility, is bring your foot back a little bit, hold that foot down, and try to touch your knee to the wall without your heel coming off the ground, right? So maybe when you first start, you can only, your toes on the ground, and that's all you can do without your heel coming off, right? But as you improve, right, you can keep coming back, right, until you get to the point where you can't touch the wall anymore. And that's kind of like move it back up and just keep working on that. So it helps loosen up that Achilles, all these tendons and ligaments that are in your ankle. It'll also help to strengthen them as well. One of the last things I want to talk about is flexibility. Now, flexibility is one of those things that probably, honestly, the mobility really is not a challenge to work on. It's pretty simple, and it's imperative that you do it. Flexibility sucks, I'm not gonna lie. I am not flexible, I'm not very flexible at all, but I'm more flexible now than I used to be. And so being able to take the time, right, whether it's 10 or 15 minutes a day, 10 or 15 minutes on your recovery day, an hour, 30 minutes, go do a yoga class, something like that, where you can really work on elongating those muscle groups, really pulling those muscles, separating those fibers, getting that blood flowing into those muscle groups, okay? So a couple really key things that I would always suggest is work on getting to the place, right, where you can literally touch your toes, okay? Or where you can get into a position, right, where you're in a squat, you're able to push out on your knees, right? So these are kind of some telltale signs that you're increasing your flexibility and your mobility, right? And so working on these movements, working on these exercises, working on these mobility things every single week, all that's going to do is take your training and your performance to the next level. So get some sort of routine, challenge yourself, change the way you think about things, right? Change the way you think about exercise. It's less about, hey, I want to be ripped or I want to get jacked, and think more about how is it going to help my overall life, right? How is it going to help me reach the goals that I may have in my life? And if you do that, I promise you, you'll probably be more likely to stick with it, but you'll enjoy it so much more. So remember, guys, if you can change your mind, you change your life. So coming again next week, guys, we got more tips coming in. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, hit that, double tap that sucker, let that heart come up. Share it with your friends, people that you love. Check out every single week on YouTube, Running with James. We have a new video, whether it's training tips on running or whether it's shoe reviews. If you like shoes like I do, you should definitely check it out, because I do all the work for you guys. I'm doing all the work. All you got to do is just go out and buy them and say, thanks, James, for being amazing.